Chapter 1, The Ordinary Day. Jackson Kern had never considered himself unlucky in love. He wasn't bitter, wasn't jaded, and certainly wasn't desperate. He was 33, single, and, if he were being honest, perfectly fine with it. Life was good. He had a job he liked, coworkers who didn't make him want to fake a sudden illness every Monday morning, and a hobby that made him feel like a secret agent without the risk of international espionage. What more could a man ask for? The hum of fluorescent lights filled the office like a low-grade buzz, punctuated by the rhythmic clacking of keyboards and the occasional laugh from the break room. Jackson sat at his desk, reviewing a spreadsheet that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated both numbers and humanity. He adjusted his glasses, tapped a few keys, and leaned back in his chair with a satisfied sigh. Problem solved. Another tiny victory in the war against chaos. "Jackson, you're smiling at a spreadsheet," came a voice from behind him. It was Marcy, queen of sarcasm and unofficial morale officer of the department. She leaned against the partition with a steaming mug of coffee, her eyebrow arched like a punctuation mark. Jackson swiveled his chair. "It's not the spreadsheet. It's the sense of accomplishment." "Aha, you know what else gives people a sense of accomplishment? Dating. You should try it sometime." He chuckled. "Thanks for the unsolicited life advice, Marcy. I'll put it on my to-do list right after learn Mandarin and run a marathon." Marcy grinned. "You joke, but seriously, you're like the last single guy in this office who isn't actively trying to change that." Jackson shrugged. "I'm not opposed to the idea. I'm just not chasing it." Translation. "You're lazy." Translation. "I have priorities." Marcy rolled her eyes and wandered off, muttering something about wasted potential. Jackson watched her go, amused. He wasn't lazy. He just didn't have the patience for the modern dating circus. Apps, swipes, ghosting, endless small talk that led nowhere. He'd rather spend his time doing something that actually engaged his brain. Like escape rooms. The thought made him smile again. He wasn't sure when the obsession had started, maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3, but it had crept up on him like a puzzle piece sliding into place. The first time had been a birthday outing for a friend. He'd expected cheesy props and predictable riddles. What he got was adrenaline, laughter, and the sweet rush of cracking a code seconds before the clock hit 0. He was hooked. Escape rooms were everything he loved. Logic, creativity, teamwork, and just enough chaos to keep things interesting. They were diplomacy under pressure, leaps of faith disguised as clues, and the occasional argument over whether a plastic raven was a hint or just bad decor. Win or lose, it was always fun. "Jackson," his boss's voice cut through his thoughts. Mr. Harlan, a man whose enthusiasm for corporate bonding bordered on evangelical, stood at the front of the office like a preacher about to deliver good news. "Team meeting in 5. Conference room." Jackson saved his work and joined the migration of employees toward the glass-walled room. Chairs scraped, chatter filled the air, and Harlan clapped his hands like a man who just discovered fire. "All right, folks," Harlan began, his grin wide enough to power a small city. "We've been crushing our quarterly goals, and I think it's time we celebrate. Team-building activity this Friday. Something fun, something challenging, something that'll make us work together." Jackson felt a flicker of curiosity. "Please let it be good. Please don't let it be trust falls." Harlan's grin widened. "We're doing an escape room." Jackson's heart did a little somersault. He kept his expression neutral. No need to look like a kid on Christmas morning. But inside, he was already planning strategies. This was his arena, his Olympics, his Super Bowl. Marcy groaned. "Oh great. Nothing says fun like being locked in a fake room with Steve from accounting." Steve raised a hand. "Hey!" Harlan ignored her. "It'll be great. 2 teams, 1 hour, bragging rights for the winners. I've already booked the place. They've got themes, mystery, adventure, sci-fi. We'll pick when we get there." Jackson's pulse quickened. He loved the randomness of themes. Each one was a new world, a new set of problems to solve. And the time limit? That was the magic ingredient. Anyone could solve a puzzle eventually. Doing it under pressure with other people was the real challenge. As the meeting wrapped up, Jackson lingered by the door, already imagining the thrill of the game. He wasn't looking for love, not really. But if it happened to knock on his door or, say, get locked in a room with him, he wasn't going to turn it away. Chapter 2, The Invitation. Friday couldn't come fast enough. Jackson spent the rest of the week juggling deadlines and daydreams of padlocks and cryptic clues. Every time his inbox pinged, he half expected an email saying the escape room had been canceled due to unforeseen circumstances, like Steve from accounting developing claustrophobia or Marcy staging a rebellion. But the email never came. The plan was solid. The excitement was real. By Friday afternoon, the office buzzed with anticipation. People were swapping theories about what the escape room would be like. Steve hoped for something Indiana Jones-y. Marcy prayed for anything that doesn't involve math. Jackson kept his thoughts to himself, though his inner strategist was already warming up. At 4:30 sharp, they piled into cars and headed downtown. The escape room venue was tucked between a coffee shop and a boutique that sold candles with names like Forest Whispers and Midnight Reverie. The sign above the door read "Locked and Loaded," in bold letters that promised adventure. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit, with walls covered in faux brick and shelves lined with antique books and mysterious trinkets. A young woman at the front desk greeted them with a smile that could have sold secrets. "Welcome. You're here for the team challenge." "That's us," Harlan said, puffing up like a proud parent. "2 teams. 1 hour. Let's do this." As Jackson scanned the room, his gaze snagged on someone standing near the corner, flipping through a clipboard. She wasn't part of the staff. Her tailored blazer and sleek ponytail said consultant, not game master. She looked up, and for a split second their eyes met. And just like that, Jackson forgot how to breathe. She was striking, but not in the intimidating way that made you want to rehearse your sentences before speaking. There was warmth in her expression, a spark of curiosity in her eyes. When she smiled, because she did, right then it was like the room tilted a little. Harlan noticed her too. "Ah, Claire. Glad you could join us, Claire." The name fit her like a well-cut suit. She crossed the room with easy confidence, extending a hand to Harlan. "Thanks for letting me tag along. I figured it'd be a good way to meet everyone before Monday." Jackson's ears perked up. Monday? So she was new. A consultant, maybe? Or a temporary hire. Whatever the case, she was joining the game. His pulse ticked up a notch. Introductions flew around like confetti. When it was Jackson's turn, he managed a smile and a handshake that he hoped didn't scream nervous teenager. Her grip was firm, her smile genuine. "Jackson," she said, repeating his name like she was filing it away. "Nice to meet you." "Likewise," he replied, and immediately wished he'd said something cooler, something witty, something that didn't sound like it had been pulled from the generic responses for social situations handbook. The game master appeared, a man in a vest and bow tie who looked like he'd stepped out of a Victorian novel. "All right, adventurers, you'll be split into 2 teams. Your mission: escape before the clock runs out. Fail and, well, let's just say you'll be here forever." Marcy muttered, "Promises, promises." Teams were assigned. Jackson ended up with Claire, Marcy, and Steve, along with 2 others from marketing. His heart did another somersault. Not only was he in the same room as Claire, he was on her team. Fate apparently had a sense of humor. The game master led them to their room, a dim chamber dressed like a detective's office from the 1940s, a desk cluttered with papers, a locked filing cabinet, a rotary phone, and a wall covered in cryptic notes. The door clicked shut behind them and the countdown began. "All right, team," Jackson said, clapping his hands. "Let's do this." Claire grinned. "Lead the way, Sherlock." The first puzzle was a cipher hidden in a newspaper article. Jackson and Claire bent over the desk, their heads close enough for him to catch the faint scent of her shampoo, something clean and citrusy. She tapped the paper with a manicured finger. "If this is a substitution cipher, the key might be in that headline." He smiled. "You know your codes." "I dabble," she said, eyes twinkling. They worked in tandem, tossing ideas back and forth, laughing when they hit dead ends. At one point, their hands brushed as they reached for the same clue, and Jackson felt a jolt like static electricity. He told himself it was nothing, just proximity, just adrenaline. But deep down, he knew better. The clock ticked on. They cracked the cipher, unlocked the cabinet, and found a series of riddles that led to a hidden compartment behind a painting. Every success brought cheers. Every failure brought groans and jokes. It was chaos, but the kind that made you forget everything else. When the final lock clicked open and the door swung wide, their team erupted in victory. They'd escaped with 3 minutes to spare. Jackson felt the rush of triumph, but it was tempered by something else, a quiet, persistent thought that had been growing since the moment Claire smiled at him. He wasn't looking for love, but maybe, just maybe, it had found him anyway. Chapter 3, the first lock. The detective's office smelled faintly of old paper and mystery, or maybe that was just Jackson's imagination working overtime. The game master had shut the door behind them with theatrical flair, and now the countdown clock glowed ominously in the corner. 60:00. "All right, team," Jackson said, scanning the room like a general surveying a battlefield. "We've got 1 hour to prove we're smarter than a bunch of padlocks." Claire laughed softly, and the sound did something strange to his chest. "No pressure, right?" Marcy groaned. "I already hate this. If there's math involved, I'm out." Steve was poking at the rotary phone like it might bite him. "Does this thing even work?" Jackson grinned. "Everything in here works, if you figure out how." He moved toward the desk, Claire following close behind. The surface was cluttered with newspapers, a magnifying glass, and a stack of envelopes tied with twine. Jackson picked up the top envelope, turning it over in his hands. "Locked," he murmured. "Combination lock. 3 digits. Claire leaned in, her ponytail brushing his shoulder. "Maybe the key's in the headlines." He glanced at her, and for a moment, the room seemed smaller. "You've done this before?" "A couple times," she said, eyes scanning the paper. "I like puzzles." Jackson smiled. "Me too." They bent over the desk together, heads close, voices low as they tossed theories back and forth. The first clue was a substitution cipher hidden in an article about a missing heirloom. Claire spotted the pattern before he did, her finger tracing letters like a pianist finding the right notes. "Got it?" she said, triumph lighting her face. The key is Raven. Jackson entered the code, and the lock popped open with a satisfying click. Nice work, she grinned. Team effort. The next puzzle was trickier. A series of riddles leading to objects scattered around the room. They split up, searching shelves and drawers, calling out discoveries like treasure hunters. At one point, Jackson reached for a book at the same time Claire did, their hands brushing. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a spark through him like static electricity. Sorry, she said, smiling. No problem, he replied, hoping his voice sounded steadier than he felt. Minutes ticked by in a blur of clues and laughter. Marcy cracked a joke about being held hostage by nerds. Steve accidentally locked himself in a closet for 30 seconds, and Jackson found himself laughing harder than he had in weeks. But beneath the humor, something else was happening. A quiet rhythm between him and Claire. They moved in sync, anticipating each other's thoughts, finishing each other's sentences. Felt easy, natural, like they'd been doing this for years. When they hit the final puzzle, a safe hidden behind a painting, the pressure spiked. The clock read 5:12. Claire crouched beside him, her brow furrowed in concentration. The code has to be the dates from those letters, she said, tapping the envelopes. Jackson nodded, fingers flying over the dial. Come on, come on. The safe clicked open with 3:07 to spare. The door swung wide, and the team erupted in cheers. Jackson felt the rush of victory, but his gaze went straight to Claire. She was laughing, her eyes bright, and for a moment he forgot about everything else. The office, the clock, the world outside that door. He wasn't looking for love. But if this was what it felt like when it knocked, he wasn't about to turn it away. Chapter 4. After the escape. The door swung open, and the game master's voice boomed like a triumphant announcer. Congratulations, detectives. You cracked the case with 3 minutes to spare. Jackson stepped into the hallway, adrenaline still humming in his veins. The victory felt good, better than good. But what lingered wasn't the thrill of beating the clock. It was the image of Claire crouched beside him, her eyes bright with focus, her laugh spilling out like sunlight when the safe finally clicked open. Drinks, Harlan called out, already herding the group toward the exit. There's a bar 2 blocks down. First round's on me. The team cheered, and Jackson found himself swept along with the tide of chatter and laughter. Outside, the evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of street food and city life. Claire walked a few steps ahead, her blazer catching the glow of neon signs. Jackson's gaze kept drifting toward her, like a compass that had found its true north. The bar was cozy, all exposed brick and warm lighting, with a soundtrack of soft jazz that made conversation easy. They claimed a long table near the back, and drinks began to flow. Beer for Steve, wine for Marcy, something citrusy for Claire. Jackson ordered a whiskey, neat, and tried not to look like he was plotting his next move. He didn't have to wait long. Claire slid into the seat beside him, her glass in hand, her smile easy. So, she said, tilting her head. You're good at this. Jackson blinked. Escape rooms? Yeah. She laughed softly. You were like the team captain in there. He shrugged, trying for modesty. I've done a few. A few. Her eyebrows lifted. You were quoting cipher patterns like they were nursery rhymes. Jackson chuckled. Okay. Maybe more than a few. How many? He hesitated, then grinned. Enough that I've started ranking them in my head. Claire laughed again, and Jackson felt that now familiar jolt in his chest. That's impressive, she said. I've only done 2 before tonight. Well, he said, swirling his whiskey. You've got a knack for it. That cipher? You nailed it. She shrugged, but her smile lingered. I like puzzles. Always have. There's something satisfying about finding order in chaos. Jackson nodded slowly. Exactly. For a moment, the noise around them faded. The clink of glasses, the hum of conversation. And it was just the two of them, leaning in, sharing a language no one else at the table seemed to speak. So, Claire said, breaking the spell with a playful glint in her eye. What's your favorite escape room theme? Jackson grinned. That's like asking a parent to pick their favorite child. Humor me, he thought for a moment. Probably the ones with a story. Not just puzzles for the sake of puzzles, but something that feels like you're part of a bigger mystery. Claire raised her glass. Good answer. They clinked, and Jackson felt the warmth of the whiskey slide down his throat, mingling with something far more dangerous, the realization that he wanted to know everything about her. Not just her favorite puzzles, but the things that made her laugh, the stories behind that spark in her eyes. The night stretched on, filled with jokes and shared memories of the game. But every time Claire laughed at something he said, every time her hand brushed the table near his, Jackson felt the ground shift beneath him. He hadn't been looking for love, but maybe love had been hiding in plain sight, like a clue waiting to be found. Chapter 5. The Unexpected Invite. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of quiet that Jackson loved. No alarm, no emails, just sunlight spilling through the blinds and the faint hum of the city outside. He brewed coffee, settled into his favorite chair, and opened a book he'd been meaning to finish for weeks. For a while, it was perfect. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. expecting a notification from his bank or a reminder about laundry. Instead, he saw a name that made his pulse skip: Claire. He stared for a second, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something less surprising. They didn't. He swiped the message open. "Hey Jackson, had fun last night. You were great in the escape room. Want to do another one? Just us?" Jackson blinked. Read it again. And again. His brain, usually so good at solving puzzles, short-circuited. Just us. He set the phone down, picked it up again, and reread the message like it might vanish if he looked away too long. This wasn't a casual invite. This was something else. A date? Maybe? Or maybe she just wanted a partner who knew the difference between a Caesar cipher and a pigpen cipher. He couldn't tell. And that uncertainty was its own kind of puzzle. He typed a reply, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, he settled on, "Sounds great. When and where?" Her response came fast. "Tonight. There's a new room downtown. The Alchemist's Chamber. Heard it's tough. Up for the challenge?" Jackson grinned despite himself. Always. The rest of the day passed in a blur. He tried to read, but the words slid off the page. He tried to watch TV, but every plot twist reminded him of Claire's smile. By 6:30, he was standing outside the Alchemist's Chamber, heart thudding like he was about to sit for an exam he hadn't studied for. Claire was already there, leaning against the brick wall, her hair loose this time, catching the golden glow of the streetlights. She looked different, not in a dramatic way, but in a way that made him notice things he hadn't before. The curve of her smile, the way her eyes seemed to hold secrets. "Hey," she said, pushing off the wall. "Ready to conjure some magic?" Jackson smiled. "Always." Inside, the room was a masterpiece of atmosphere. Stone walls, flickering lanterns, shelves lined with dusty tomes and glass vials filled with colored liquids. A cauldron sat in the center, ominous and inviting. The game master handed them a scroll with their mission: brew the philosopher's elixir and escape before the hourglass runs dry. Claire grinned. "This is going to be fun." Jackson nodded, though his mind was split between the puzzles and the fact that they were alone. No Marcy cracking jokes, no Steve getting stuck in closets. Just him and Claire, locked in a room full of secrets. The first clue was hidden in a riddle etched into the cauldron. They bent over it together, voices low, laughter bubbling up when they misread a line. At one point, Claire reached for a vial at the same time he did, their fingers brushing. The contact was brief, but it sent a spark through him, a reminder that this wasn't just a game anymore. As they worked, the rhythm returned, the easy flow of ideas, the shared triumph when a lock clicked open. But there was something new now, something layered beneath the teamwork. Every glance lingered a little longer. Every laugh felt like a thread pulling them closer. When they solved the final puzzle and the door swung open, Jackson felt the rush of victory. But it was different this time. It wasn't just about beating the clock. It was about the fact that he didn't want the night to end. Claire turned to him, her smile soft, her eyes bright. "You're good at this," she said, echoing her words from last night. Jackson smiled back. "We make a good team." For a moment, neither of them moved. The city hummed outside, the hourglass lay empty, and Jackson realized something with startling clarity. He wasn't just solving puzzles anymore. He was standing at the edge of something bigger, something he hadn't planned for but couldn't ignore. And for the first time in a long time, he wanted to take the leap. Chapter 6, 2 players only. The city was alive with weekend energy. Laughter spilling from bars, headlights streaking across wet pavement. But inside the alchemist's chamber, time had felt suspended. Now, standing outside in the cool night air, Jackson realized he didn't want the spell to break. Claire seemed to feel it too. She lingered beside him, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, her smile soft but charged with something unspoken. "That was fun," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that made the word feel bigger than it was. Jackson nodded. "Yeah, you're good at this." She laughed lightly. "You keep saying that. Because it's true." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not awkward, but weighted, like the pause before a door swings open. Then Claire tilted her head, eyes glinting. "You know," she said, "there's another room here, smaller, 2-player only." Jackson blinked. 2-player. She nodded. "They call it the Vault. 15 minutes. High difficulty. Want to try?" His pulse kicked up like a runner at the starting line. He could have said no, could have played it safe, gone home, pretended this night was just about puzzles. But something in her expression, something daring and bright, made the decision for him. "Let's do it," he said. The game master led them down a narrow hallway to a steel door that looked like it belonged in a bank heist movie. Inside, the room was stark. Metal walls, a single table, and a massive vault door dominating the far side. A digital timer glowed above it, 1,500 hours. "Your mission," the game master intoned, "is to crack the vault before time runs out. Fail and, well, let's just say you'll never see daylight again." He winked and shut the door. Claire grinned. No pressure. Jackson scanned the room, adrenaline humming. "All right, partner. Let's steal some treasure." The first clue was etched into the table. A series of numbers and symbols that looked like gibberish until Claire spotted the pattern. "It's a Fibonacci sequence," she said, her voice quick with excitement. "The missing number unlocks the first box." Jackson entered the code, and the box popped open, revealing a set of keys and a riddle about the weight of secrets. They worked fast, tossing ideas back and forth, their voices overlapping, laughter bubbling up when they hit dead ends. At one point, Claire leaned over him to grab a key, her hair brushing his cheek, and Jackson felt his breath hitch. "Focus, Kern. It's a game. Just a game." But it didn't feel like just a game anymore. It felt like something electric, something alive, pulsing beneath every glance and every accidental touch. The clock ticked down, 3:12, 2:45, and they were still one lock away. Claire crouched beside him, her shoulder pressed against his, her voice low. "The answer has to be in the phrase. The weight of secrets." "What weighs secrets?" Jackson stared at the riddle, then at her, and for a split second, the answer didn't matter. All he could think about was how close she was, how her breath brushed his jaw, how the air between them felt charged enough to spark. "Truth," he said suddenly. "The weight of secrets is truth." He entered the code, and the vault door swung open with 0:58 to spare. They laughed, loud, breathless, triumphant, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The open vault loomed behind them, but the real treasure was right here, in the space between their laughter and the way her eyes locked on his. "Nice work, Sherlock," she murmured. Jackson smiled, his heart pounding like a drum. "Couldn't have done it without you." And in that instant, he knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about escape rooms anymore. This was about the fact that he didn't want to escape her. Not tonight, not ever. Chapter 7: The Complication. Monday morning arrived like a splash of cold water, emails, deadlines, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights reminding Jackson that real life didn't pause for weekend magic. He walked into the office with a smile he couldn't quite hide, replaying fragments of Saturday night in his head. Claire's laugh, the brush of her shoulder against his, the way her eyes had locked on his when the vault door swung open. He wasn't imagining it. There was something there. Marcy noticed the smile before he even reached his desk. Well, she said, leaning against the partition like a cat who'd found cream. "Someone had a good weekend." Jackson tried for casual. "It was fine." "Fine." Her grin widened. "You were grinning like a lottery winner when you walked in." "Spill." He shook his head, chuckling. "Nothing to spill." Marcy narrowed her eyes. "Aha, sure." Before she could press further, a voice floated across the room. Warm, familiar, and enough to make Jackson's pulse jump. "Morning." Claire stood by the coffee machine, her blazer crisp, her hair pulled back in that sleek ponytail that made her look like she could solve world crises before lunch. Jackson managed a smile that he hoped didn't look like a confession. "Morning," he said. She crossed the room, coffee in hand, and stopped by his desk. "Got a minute?" "Always," he said, then immediately regretted sounding so eager. She smiled faintly, but there was something in her eyes, something that didn't match the easy confidence he'd seen before. "Walk with me." They stepped into the hallway, away from curious eyes and Marcy's radar-like attention. Claire leaned against the wall, her expression thoughtful. "So," she began, "I had a great time Saturday." Jackson felt relief flood him. "Me too." Her smile softened. "You're good company, Jackson." He grinned. "You're not so bad yourself." For a moment, it felt easy again, banter, warmth, that spark humming between them. But then her smile faltered, and Jackson felt the shift like a sudden drop in temperature. "There's something I should tell you," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure when to bring it up, but I might be moving." Jackson blinked. "Moving?" She nodded. "Chicago. There's a job offer on the table. Big project, great opportunity. I haven't decided yet, but it's real." The words landed like a lock clicking shut. Jackson stared at her, his mind scrambling for something to say, something that didn't sound like panic. "Oh," he managed. "That's big." "Yeah." She looked down at her coffee, then back at him. "I didn't want to blindside you. I just thought you should know." Jackson nodded slowly, his thoughts a tangle of logic and emotion. He wasn't the kind of guy who made impulsive moves. He liked plans, structure, puzzles with clear solutions. But this was a problem with no easy answer. Claire straightened, her smile returning, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Anyway, I'll keep you posted." She walked away, leaving Jackson in the hallway with a truth heavier than any vault door. He wanted her to stay. And for the first time in a long time, he realized he was willing to fight for something that wasn't part of the plan. Chapter 8: The Office Buzz. By Tuesday, Jackson had convinced himself he was doing a decent job of acting normal. He answered emails, attended meetings, even cracked a joke about Steve's spreadsheet meltdown. On the surface, everything looked fine, except for the part where every time Claire walked into the room, his pulse spiked like a faulty elevator. And apparently he wasn't as subtle as he thought. "Okay," Marcy said, dropping into the chair beside his desk with the grace of someone who'd never respected personal space. "What's going on with you and Claire?" Jackson didn't look up from his monitor. "Nothing." "Aha." She leaned in, lowering her voice like a conspirator. You two were practically glowing after that escape room. And then Saturday, you disappeared. Together, Jackson sighed. We went to another escape room. Marcy's eyebrows shot up. Just the two of you? He hesitated. Yeah. Marcy grinned like a cat who'd found a bowl of cream. Oh, this is good. It's not, Jackson started. But Marcy cut him off with a wave. Don't even try. I've seen rom-coms. This is Act 2. Jackson groaned. Marcy, relax, she said, smirking. I'm rooting for you. Just don't mess it up. Before he could respond, Steve wandered over, clutching a coffee like it was a life raft. What are we talking about? Jackson's love life, Marcy said cheerfully. Steve blinked. Jackson has a love life? Jackson buried his face in his hands. I hate this office. Claire chose that exact moment to walk in, her heels clicking softly against the floor, her smile polite but distant. Jackson straightened, forcing his expression into something neutral. She nodded at him as she passed, and he nodded back, like two diplomats pretending everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. Not since yesterday. Not since the hallway conversation that had left him with a truth he couldn't shake. She might leave. And if she did, all of this, all the laughter, the sparks, the possibility, would vanish like a clue solved too late. He spent the rest of the day in a fog, answering emails on autopilot while his mind spun like a combination lock. He wasn't impulsive. He didn't make grand gestures. But as he watched Claire laugh at something Marcy said, her head tilting just so, he felt a decision crystallize. If there was even a chance to change the ending of this story, he had to take it. And for Jackson Kern, that meant one thing, a plan. Puzzle. A gesture that spoke his language and hers. Chapter 9, The Big Challenge. By Wednesday night, Jackson had a plan, or at least the skeleton of one. It wasn't flowers or candlelight or some grand speech that would make Claire stay. That wasn't him. He didn't do cliches. He did puzzles. He did strategy. And if he was going to fight for this, he was going to do it in a way that spoke their shared language. An escape room. But not just any escape room. This one would be different. Personal. A game designed for two players with clues that told a story, not about alchemists or detectives, but about them. Jackson spent hours on the phone with a local venue, negotiating something they didn't usually offer. A custom room. He pitched the idea with the kind of enthusiasm he usually reserved for cracking a cipher. By the time he hung up, the plan was set. Friday night. 1 hour. A room built around memories they'd already made, and hints of the future he hoped they could share. Friday arrived like a drumbeat in his chest. He texted Claire mid-afternoon. Got a surprise for you tonight. Hope you're up for a challenge. Her reply came fast. Always. When she walked into the venue that evening, Jackson felt the air shift. She wore a simple black coat, her hair loose, her smile curious. You're being mysterious, she said, stepping closer. I like it. Jackson grinned, trying to keep his nerves in check. You'll like this even more. The game master led them to the room. A cozy space dressed like a study, with shelves of books, scattered notes, and a single locked chest in the center. The timer glowed above the door. 60:00. Claire scanned the room, her brow furrowing. This feels different. Jackson shrugged, feigning innocence. Maybe it's a new theme. The first clue was a riddle etched on a wooden plaque. What began with a cipher and ended with a vault. Claire laughed softly. That's us. She looked at him, eyes bright with realization. You designed this? Jackson smiled. Guilty. Her laugh turned into something softer, something that made his chest ache. You're unbelievable. They moved through the puzzles together, each one a breadcrumb trail of their shared moments. A lock that opened with the code from their first escape room. A clue hidden in a quote about finding order in chaos. The words she'd said at the bar. Every solved puzzle revealed something more personal. A photo of a vault. A tiny glass vial like the ones from the alchemist's chamber. A note that read, some escapes aren't about leaving, they're about finding where you belong. By the time they reached the final chest, the clock read 5 o'clock. Claire knelt beside him, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned the key. Inside was a single card, handwritten in Jackson's neat script. I don't want this to end. Not the puzzles, not the laughter, not us. Stay. Claire stared at the card, her breath catching. When she looked up, her eyes were shining. Jackson. He swallowed hard. I know you have choices. I know Chicago's a big deal. But if there's even a chance you'd stay, if there's even a chance you'd choose this, I had to ask. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Then Claire smiled. A slow, luminous smile that felt like the answer to every question he hadn't dared to ask. You're not making this easy, she whispered. Jackson's voice was low, steady. Good. And in that instant, with the clock ticking down and the chest open between them, Jackson realized something. He'd solved a lot of puzzles in his life, but this was the one that mattered most. Chapter 10. The door opens, the timer above the door ticked down. 4:12, 4:11. But neither of them moved. The chest lay open between them, the card resting inside like a secret finally spoken aloud. Claire stared at it, her fingers brushing the edge, her breath shallow. Jackson felt his pulse hammering in his ears. He'd planned this moment, rehearsed it in his head, but now that it was here, every word felt fragile. He wanted to fill the silence, to explain, to bargain, but something told him to wait, to let her speak first. Finally, Claire looked up. Her eyes were bright, but not with tears, at least not yet. They were bright with something deeper, something that made Jackson's chest ache. "You really did all this?" she said softly. "For me." Jackson swallowed hard. "For us." Her lips curved into a smile, small, trembling, but real. "You're impossible." He managed a grin. "I've been called worse." She laughed then, a sound that broke the tension like sunlight through clouds. But it faded quickly, replaced by a quiet that felt heavier than before. "Jackson," she said, her voice low, "I wasn't lying about Chicago. It's a huge opportunity. I've worked years for something like this." "I know," he said, "and I'd never ask you to give up something that matters. But if staying is even an option, if there's even a chance, I had to tell you how I feel." Her gaze held his, steady and searching. "And how do you feel?" Jackson took a breath, the kind that felt like stepping off a ledge. "Like I don't want this to end. Not the puzzles, not the laughter, not you. I want more nights like Saturday, more clues, more everything." The timer ticked down, 3:02, but Jackson barely heard it. Claire was silent, her expression unreadable, and for a moment, fear clawed at him. Maybe he'd misread everything. Maybe this was a mistake. Then she reached across the chest and took his hand. The touch was light, almost tentative, but it sent a shock through him like a lock clicking open. "You know," she said, her voice soft, "I've been thinking about that offer all week, about what I'd be leaving behind." Jackson's breath caught. And then you go and do something like this." Her smile widened, slow and luminous. "You make it really hard to walk away." Relief crashed over him like a wave, leaving him dizzy. So, she said, squeezing his hand, "I'm not saying no to Chicago yet, but I'm saying yes to dinner tomorrow, and the day after, and maybe a few more escape rooms." Jackson laughed, loud, unguarded, the kind of laugh that felt like victory. "Deal." The timer hit 2:15, and the door swung open with a soft click, as if the room itself had been waiting for this moment. Jackson stood, pulling Claire to her feet, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he'd solved the puzzle that mattered most. Not because he cracked a code or found a key, but because he'd taken a leap and she'd leapt with him. Chapter 11: The Leap. Saturday evening found Jackson in a quiet corner booth at a little Italian place downtown, the kind with soft lighting and the faint scent of garlic that made everything feel warm and intimate. He'd arrived early, partly because he hated being late, mostly because his nerves had staged a coup and refused to let him sit still at home. Claire walked in 5 minutes later, and the world tilted again. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and when she smiled at him, Jackson felt something settle in his chest, a certainty he hadn't felt in years. "Hey," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "You beat me here." "Old habit," he replied, grinning. "I like to scope out the exits." She laughed, and just like that, the tension eased. They ordered wine, shared bruschetta, and for a while it was easy, conversation flowing like water, laughter bubbling up at all the right moments. But beneath it all, Jackson felt the weight of the question pressing against his ribs. What happens now? Claire must have felt it too, because halfway through the main course, she set down her fork and looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "So," she said softly, "about Chicago." Jackson's pulse kicked up, but he kept his voice steady. "Yeah." She traced the rim of her glass with one finger, her eyes on the deep red swirl inside. "It's a big opportunity. I'd be leading a team, working on projects I've dreamed about for years." "I know," he said, "and I'd never want to stand in the way of that." Her gaze lifted, locking on his. "But then there's this." She gestured between them, her smile faint but real. "And I didn't see this coming." Jackson swallowed hard. "Neither did I." For a moment, silence stretched, soft, fragile, full of possibilities. Then Claire leaned in, her voice low. "I don't have an answer yet. I can't make that decision tonight. But I can tell you this, I want to see where this goes. I want more nights like this. More puzzles. More us." Relief washed over him, warm and dizzying. "Me too," he said, his voice rough around the edges. "More everything." She smiled then, a slow, luminous smile that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "So we take it one step at a time?" Jackson nodded. "One step at a time." They clinked glasses, and for the first time in days, Jackson felt the knot in his chest loosen. He didn't know what the future held. Chicago, Detroit, something in between. But he knew this, he was done waiting for life to happen. He was ready to leap, even if the landing was uncertain. And as Claire laughed at something he said, her eyes bright and her hand brushing his across the table, Jackson realized something simple and profound. Some puzzles don't need solving. Some just need living. Chapter 12: The Celebration. The office was buzzing like a hive on Friday afternoon. Streamers hung from the ceiling. A cake sat on the break room counter with quarterly goals crushed, scrawled in frosting, and Marcy was already 2 cups deep into the punch bowl. holding court like a queen. Jackson walked in with Claire at his side, and for the first time, he didn't feel the need to hide the smile tugging at his mouth. They'd agreed, quietly over coffee that morning, that they weren't going to make a big announcement. But judging by the way Marcy's eyes lit up the second she saw them, that plan was about to implode. Well, Marcy said, striding over with the kind of grin that could power a small city. Look who decided to show up together. Jackson tried for casual. We carpooled. Aha. Marcy crossed her arms, her smirk practically glowing. And I suppose you just happen to look like two people who've been sharing inside jokes all week? Claire laughed, and Jackson felt his chest loosen. You're very observant, she said, her tone teasing. Marcy gasped theatrically. Oh my God. It's true. Steve, get over here. Steve appeared, clutching a plate of cake like it was evidence. What's happening? Jackson and Claire, Marcy announced, her voice rising like a town crier. They're a thing. Steve blinked, then grinned. Called it. Jackson groaned. You did not call it. I absolutely did, Steve said, taking a bite of cake. I said, Jackson's gonna fall for the new girl. And Marcy said, no way, he's too boring. And now look. Marcy slapped his arm. I did not say boring. I said predictable. Claire laughed so hard she nearly spilled her punch. Jackson shook his head, but he couldn't stop smiling. There was something freeing about it, about not pretending anymore, about letting the truth out into the open like sunlight through a cracked door. Harlan appeared then, clapping his hands like a man who'd just discovered fire. Team, great work this quarter. Drinks are on me tonight. The cheer that followed was loud enough to rattle the streamers. Jackson glanced at Claire, and she met his gaze with a smile that made everything else fade. The noise, the laughter, the chaos. For a moment, it was just them, standing in the middle of a crowded room, sharing something quiet and certain. Marcy leaned in, her voice low but smug. You know this means you two have to do the next escape room as a couple. Jackson grinned. Wouldn't have it any other way. Claire raised her glass, her eyes sparkling. To puzzles, she said softly. Jackson clinked his glass against hers, his voice steady. And to finding the right answers. Chapter 13, the epilogue. 1 year later, the sign above the door read locked and loaded. But the place had changed, sleeker, bigger, with new themes advertised in bold letters. The Pharaoh's Tomb, Cyber Heist, The Lost Library. Jackson stood outside, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, his heart thudding like it had the first time he walked through these doors with Claire. Except tonight wasn't just another game. Claire arrived a few minutes later, her smile as bright as ever. Her hair swept back in a way that made him think of every moment they'd shared since that first escape room. A year of puzzles and laughter, of late-night talks and quiet mornings, of plans that had shifted and choices that had been made. Chicago had called, but she'd stayed because sometimes the best opportunities aren't on a map. They're standing right in front of you. Ready to lose? She teased, slipping her arm through his. Jackson grinned. Not a chance. Inside, the game master led them to a room called the Collector's Vault. It was dim and atmospheric, filled with shelves of artifacts and a massive locked chest in the center. The timer glowed above the door. 60:00. Claire scanned the room, her eyes narrowing in mock suspicion. This feels familiar. Jackson shrugged, feigning innocence. Maybe it's a new theme. The first clue was a riddle etched into a brass plaque. What began with a cipher and ended with a vault? Claire laughed softly. Deja vu. They moved through the puzzles together, just like they always had, quick, intuitive, in sync. But tonight, every clue carried a thread of memory. A cipher like the one from their first game. A vial like the ones from the alchemist's chamber. A quote about finding order in chaos. The words she'd spoken that night at the bar. Finally, with 10 minutes left on the clock, they reached the last chest. Claire knelt beside him, her fingers brushing his as she turned the key. Inside was a velvet box. She froze. Jackson. He swallowed hard, his voice steady despite the drumbeat in his chest. Some escapes aren't about leaving, he said softly. They're about finding where you belong. Claire opened the box, and the ring caught the light. A simple band, elegant, timeless. Her breath hitched, and when she looked up, her eyes were shining. Are you? She began. But Jackson cut her off with a smile that held every answer. Yes, he said. Marry me. For a moment, silence stretched, soft, fragile, full of everything they'd built together. Then Claire laughed, bright and unguarded, and threw her arms around him. Yes, she whispered against his ear. 1,000 times yes. The timer ticked down 8:45, but neither of them cared. The door could stay locked forever, and Jackson wouldn't mind, because he'd already solved the only puzzle that mattered.